Burning Point.
Hello and welcome to the show, with me, Katerina Kudashkina. Several key positions in the new government of Ukraine have been passed over to foreign citizens. Ukraine has to learn from foreign experience. That's what Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko told the parliament, Rada. He then signed decrees awarding Ukrainian citizenship to 3 foreign citizens who got the key government positions. One of them is the Minister of Health, Alexander Kvitashvili, a former Georgian citizen. Then Aivaras Abramovičius, Lithuanian investment banker, to be more precise, partner in investment firm East Capital, has become the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. And even Georgian ex-president Mikhail Saakashvili had signaled his readiness to serve the Ukrainian government, but has later withdrawn his proposal. Well, the Ministry of Finance will be run by an American citizen, Natalie Yaretsko, who is an ethnic Ukrainian who has worked in Ukraine for more than 20 years after holding various economic positions in the U.S. State Department. So what do we need to make out of these appointments? And this is something we're discussing with our guest speaker, Kirill Koktysh, political analyst and associate professor at MGIMO, which stands for Moscow State Institute of International Relations.
Well, this is actually this very special practice. Usually foreigners are invited when they have, actually to deal with the problems and to deal with the problems with the way for which nobody would say thank you. That means that actually those positions are usually reserved for those actors that would have actually everything what they would do would produce heart rate from all the rest of the citizens. So that means the first reason to invite foreigners is just to make secure your own internal political place. Because actually it's usually foreigners are invited when you have to do something extremely unpopular. Second reason, when, for example, if you are getting foreign financing, that means that foreigner would be in control of the money flow. And probably both of these reasons are, actual for the to explain the current situation with the Poroshenko's government. Because, as far as I know, one Minister of Finance, Minister of Economy, that means a position which should be responsible for the control of the money flows from one side and for monetization of the Ukrainian economy, which is actually half destroyed from the other hand. So that means that probably those foreigners would be both controllers, both in control of money flows, and from other side, these persons should be blamed tomorrow for everything bad which occurred in Ukraine.
But as far as I understand, this is not exactly an idea of an independent state, is it?
Usually, semi-independent states are doing this. For example, we can remind the Russians example when Russian privatization, terrible privatization, was made with the foreigner's hand and the foreigner's advice. Because actually, the result of privatization was illegitimate business in Russia, which we are suffering up to now. So, some other countries, foreigners usually are invited because, actually what they would be sharing, not their professionalism, but also their interest. And first of all, any active political player would have his own interest, but not interest of the country he is working for. So that means that because foreigners should be loyal to their native states, but not to the states that hire them. So actually it's not a broad practice, it's usually practice of the semi-independent states. It could be an exclusion when the level of trust is really between different states is really high. So that means that, for example, in Belarus we can find numerous examples when Russians are hired, and actually, as I remember, one minister now is Russian, but previously he was even Russian citizen, but now he had to adopt Russian citizenship. But actually he was invited when he was Russian, and he was Russian citizen. The second example, when there is a trust between two states, but it seems to me it's not the Ukrainian case.
Do we need to understand that Ukraine is now de jure turning into some kind of American colony?
Yes, actually, de facto, Ukraine was actually lost its independence last year because it's practically bankrupt, and that means that those states who gave money, first of all, should take care how to get their money back and their income as well. And now it's political control over these actually Ukrainian debts that was made with American money. So actually, yes, it's de jure colonization of Ukraine. The system that all the previous year existed as de facto, but not as de jure.
Getting back to your analysis of those appointments, you said that appointing these people might signal that new measures that would be extremely unpopular are going to be implemented, and we see that here's a Minister of Economy, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Health. Who actually are those people? Do we know those people who have become the ministers in this government, and what exactly do we need to expect of them?
Well, actually, I don't know these persons, but the matter is that they're hired managers, first of all, because what the trend would be the privatization of the social goods. So that means the social goods would be reduced. In the worst scenario, they would be reduced to zero, and all they would be monetized. And health ministry is the first one, because it's healthcare one of the most tremendous social good. And I guess the other social goods would be liquidated or monetized, which would be the same quite soon. So actually, this manager's case, but the matter is not who manage, but who orders. And that means that those banks and those states probably who hired money to Ukraine and to which Ukraine has to return these debts would dictate the conditions. And these ministers would be just following what they would be ordered to do.
Dr. Koktysh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Kirill Koktysh, political analyst and associate professor at MGIMO, Moscow. This is Burning Point. We are discussing the appointment of several foreigners to the key positions in the government of Ukraine. Well, if we have any doubts as to the intentions of the new ministers, the new Minister of Finance has already promised to come up with an ambitious cost-cutting program. So, on the other hand, she's a graduate of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and we here in Russia still have some very special memories of Harvard experts who used to advise the Russian government on privatization campaign in the early 1990s. But this is something we are proceeding to discuss with our next guest speaker, Dr. Alexander Domrin, professor with the High School of Economics and visiting professor of law at the University of Virginia.
I'm thinking about Ukraine, not only when I'm thinking about this particular event, when foreigners were invited to join the government of Ukraine, but in general, when I think about Ukraine today, it reminds me of Russia back in the 1990s. Somehow, since the 1990s, Russia has made a tremendous improvement in its internal politics, in its internal development, in its governmental structure. But let's take a look at Russia back in the 1990s. Didn't we have foreigners in our government? Was it good for Russia when we had foreigners in the Russian government? I want to remind you of, let's say, Boris Berezovsky, who was a citizen of Israel. There was another member of the Russian government, Boris Brevnov, who happened to be a U.S. citizen. You know what's interesting here? It's not only that Ukraine decided to invite foreigners to join its government. I'm absolutely sure that those new members of the Ukrainian government will bring their own stuff from their own countries, from other countries of the world. And once again, didn't we have a similar situation back in the 1990s here in Russia? Didn't we have numerous assistants, advisors, consultants who worked for the Russian government from other countries of the world? Didn't Anatoly Chubais surround himself by dozens of American advisors, consultants? Was it good for Russia? I don't think so. Just one story, just one detail. I want to remind you of some of those advisors who were invited by Anatoly Chubais from America to assist Russia in its transition to market economy, privatization, etc. It was one of the most famous scandals back in the 1990s when two individuals from the Harvard Institute for International Development, Schleifer and Jonathan Hay, when they were working as the advisors to the Russian government, when they were advising the Russian government how to transfer Russia to a civilized market economy, what did they do? Their program received $58 million from the U.S. government to assist Russia in the privatization reform. And of course, it was such a temptation for them when they had some inside information about what enterprises, what factories were supposed to be privatized. Well, it was such a temptation for them that they decided to use that inside information to enrich themselves. They invested money into those enterprises that were supposed to be privatized, basically to invest their money and get back that money after privatization of those companies, of those enterprises. What was even more interesting is that they didn't invest their own money. They actually invested the money of the U.S. government, that very money which was supposed to assist Russia in its transition to a civilized market economy. It was an absolutely incredible scandal. As a result of that scandal, not only this program was stopped, but the whole Harvard Institute of International Development, originally it was founded by Jeffrey Sachs. The Harvard Institute for International Development was killed. Jeffrey Sachs, in disgrace, had to move from Harvard to Columbia University. And as a result of that, there was a famous trial. Schleifer and Hay were found guilty, and they were supposed to pay more than $100 million back to the U.S. government. You see, when I think about Ukraine today, it reminds me of Russia back in the 1990s so much. And, well, I don't think that it was a good idea of the Ukrainian government to invite those people. I don't expect any major improvement. And, well, I feel so sorry for my Ukrainian friends.
Do you think that Ukraine eventually would follow the same pattern? How good are the chances that they are going to ultimately gain independence, real independence?
Russia realized that we made huge mistakes back in the 1990s. Russia decided not to repeat those mistakes. Unfortunately, Ukraine didn't learn from our mistakes. And once again, looking back at Ukraine back in the 1990s and at Ukraine today, I have a feeling that this is a kind of a Groundhog Day when the mistakes are being repeated again and again and nobody wants to correct them.
What is the agenda of the so-called allies of Kiev? Are they really working to make it independent?
I don't consider Ukraine to be a sovereign country. I don't consider Ukraine to be a truly independent country. But once again, Russia was not a truly sovereign country back in the 1990s either. And from this point of view, of course, the external regulation of Ukraine will continue. But now it will be not just external regulation, but also with infiltration of external specialists, external ministers to the government of Ukraine itself.
Why do you think people who have already failed on their positions, like Mr. Saakashvili, are positioned to play a role in Ukraine? Haven't they failed already once?
Some people have no shame, and that's exactly what I think about Saakashvili. But I believe that it's an even more disgusting position of the Ukrainian government, who invite people like Saakashvili or people who were so close to Saakashvili to work for Ukraine today. Those people failed their own country, and now they're invited basically to fail another country, Ukraine. And that was a decision of the Ukrainian government. So, well, it's up to them.
In Russia, their agenda was to get the control of our resources.
The Ukrainian government needs to start thinking about the improvement of lives of their own compatriots. So far, the main agenda of the Ukrainian government was to fight their own people in some parts of Ukraine that pronounced themselves to be independent or to be sovereign. Of course, I speak about Donetsk and Lugansk. And I think that winter is already here. Winter has already arrived. Winter will be a very important period of time for Ukraine and for Ukrainian economy, because if by spring there won't be any major improvements in the Ukrainian economy, either with those foreign ministers or without them, then it will be a major disappointment even for those who still support the Ukrainian government.
Professor, thank you very much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker this time was Dr. Alexander Domrin, the professor at the High School of Economics and visiting professor of law at the University of Virginia. And with this, we end this edition of Burning Point, brought to you by me, Katerina Kudoshkina. Thank you so much for staying with us. Goodbye and take care.